Good evening. Some of you were here a month ago and you're going to hear some of the things that I said last time. Am I speaking correctly into the microphone at the back? Yes, I'm getting the nod. So no mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou I tēnei ahi ahi. Welcome and good evening everyone. My name is Margaret and it's my role as convener of the South Alive Housing Action Group to welcome you all and to ensure a smooth running of the seminar. So no pressure on me here. It's a bit like that. Thank you for attending the second of what our housing group hopes will become a regular feature on our calendar, exploring alternative housing ideas. First though, some housekeeping. In keeping with level 1 COVID restrictions, I assume you all took advantage of the hand sanitizer at the door. As you have booked your place here tonight, that is sufficient for the tracing process, with Maria or somebody marking you off as you arrived. In the event of a fire, people in the back and in the foyer, please use the door that you came through. People who are sitting in this room, it's like in the airplane. If you're sitting next to the door, you have to make sure everybody can get out. So the door is just between those two blinds there. Yes, you're it. I didn't ask you if you were strong enough to throw them out. Toilets can be found down the hallway to the left. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover and hold is the order of the day. Good luck with that. You also have to move away from glassed areas, which is going to be very difficult to do given all the glass doors and windows that we have. But when the shaking stops, that's ours, not the land, we will reassess the situation. And finally, please raise your hand if you have never been to this venue before. Oh, still some people. 1,000 welcomes. Thank you. I want to acknowledge our main speaker, who's hiding in the house here, Kyron Gosse from Auckland, who's attending electronically and who I will introduce shortly. Other speakers are Brad Gibson, a local tiny house dweller in Southland, and we were hoping to have Ella Lawton, who lives in a tiny house in South Invercargill, so one of her own. She has a 3-month-old baby and she got the timing wrong. She thought she would come at 7 o'clock, do her thing for 10 minutes and then disappear. And so we're hoping she can bath the baby, feed the baby, put the baby down and be back by about 8:45 for her short presentation. She is keen, so we'll see how we go. And also welcome back Jonathan Shaw from the Invercargill City Council, who will tackle any compliance questions from the council's point of view. Don't look like that, Jonathan, because I warned you. Okay, the format of the evening is, there he is. I will introduce Kyron. He will speak for about 45 minutes. We'll then take some questions for Kyron, and he will leave us because he's got another appointment. He will be followed by Brad and then Ella. Again, there'll be opportunities to answer questions from those two. Last month, people were so enthusiastic, they asked questions during the presentation. We really would prefer that you hold those till the end. It makes a difference if somebody in the front asks a question that they're really bursting and the people down the back can't hear. We have another microphone, so we'll have a runner to give you the ability to ask questions, and then they'll be recorded as well, which will be useful. We'll wind up with a cuppa, finishing the evening by around 9:30 or later if you hang around. The presentation will be filmed and eventually go on our South Alive YouTube connection. We will not be filming the audience, so privacy rules are taken care of there. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Kyron Gosse. Kyron has a substantial background in real estate and property investing and has taken an interest in how emerging trends and technology are influencing the property industry. He lives in his own tiny house and is keen on developing the movement to make going tiny more accessible for others. Kyron, who became interested in the tiny house movement about 4 years ago, was a founding member of New Zealand Tiny House Association formed last spring, was aware that many potential owners of private tiny houses struggled with working their way through the regulations which differed in each council jurisdiction. tiny house Kyron lives in is council legal, as the property is zoned for multiple dwellings. He does realise, though, that under the Caravan Act, each local authority has quite clear-cut rules about caravans, and people are allowed to live permanently in caravans or tiny houses on wheels. Kyron has a story to tell, so over to you. And our techno wizard will make sure it works.
Thank you very much, Margaret. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, you might just turn you up just a tinge.
Yep.
How's that?
Speak.
You can hear me okay? I can't see you, but if you just want to speak into the mic, let me know you can hear me.
It's all good here.
Perfect. Awesome. I'll get on to it. And thank you so much for hosting me. Today I'm going to be sharing about the tiny house movement, about my journey through the tiny house movement, but also about sort of the rules and the legislation as a whole. So as we go through it, I'll start with myself, with my company Go Tiny, and then with the association we've set up. I'll talk a lot about my tiny house because I know that's something many people are interested in and seeing pretty pictures of tiny houses. I mean, let's be honest, that's one of the reasons why we do get into tiny houses, because we sit there on Instagram and Pinterest looking at all the amazing, cute little tiny houses out there. I'll share with you why I went tiny in the first place, and then we'll get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty around what an actual tiny house is, what the definition is, or what we mean when we speak about tiny houses. I will give an overview on tiny houses in the law, the pros and cons of tiny house living, and then we'll go for a few case studies from a couple of people around New Zealand about how they're using tiny houses to solve real-world problems before opening it up to the audience for some Q&A. So a little bit about me. I am an entrepreneur. For me, it's all about the problem solving. But my background, I am a property investor and real estate futurist. So that means I'm looking to the future to see how emerging trends and technologies are converging and how that will actually impact the way we live, work and invest, and what the outcome will be for property and real estate as a whole. I am the chairman, just newly appointed chairman of the New Zealand Tiny House Association. I'm the founder of my company, Go Tiny, and I obviously live in a tiny house myself. So, I know many of you are probably quite excited to see the tiny house. Obviously, it's night at the moment, so I can't give you the best tour. But back in June, anyone who knows tiny houses knows there's like one YouTube channel to go to, Living Big in a Tiny House. And luckily, back in June, Bryce and Russ actually came around and filmed my tiny house. So it's been absolutely insane. There's been 2 million views since June. And that, for me, sort of attests to, I guess, how big the tiny house movement actually is. But if you want to watch that video, that's probably the easiest and quickest way for you to get an insight into and check out my tiny house, but also get a bit of an insight into me. Yeah. To give you a quick debrief or a quick rundown, as you can see in that bottom left corner, it is on wheels, and that's one of the key things of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. To clarify, and I will get into this soon, but anytime I talk about tiny houses, I talk about tiny houses on wheels. That's probably a huge differentiation, and especially as we start getting into the rules side of things. Tiny houses on foundations, there's no arguments that they meet the definition of the building and therefore must meet building consents and all those sorts of things. But tiny houses on wheels is where we sometimes get a bit of conflict with councils, and that whole definition of what a vehicle actually is. And then, as Margaret pointed out at the start, different councils have different rules about being able to live in a caravan permanently. So So I sleep in a loft. Actually, I'm sitting up in one of the lofts at the moment. I have 2 bedrooms, and I'll share that in a second, the exact layout. But yeah, you can see the bedroom up there on the top right. That's where I sleep. I have a standard double bed, and all I did was take the feet off. The reality is you don't spend much time in the bedroom anyway. When you're usually horizontal, so it doesn't make a difference to me. For me, it was all about the kitchen. Many moons ago, I used to be a chef, and so for me, it was all about the kitchen. I still make the joke, actually, that I designed a kitchen and built a tiny house around it. So this kitchen is probably bigger than any apartment kitchen for sure, but also quite a bit bigger than many house kitchens. I've got the almost full-size fridge. I've got the pantry, the microwave, dishwasher. I've got 2 ovens and four gas burners. Since that photo was taken, I've had the exhaust put in as well. So yeah, I mean, I have absolutely everything. There's absolutely nothing I am lacking by living in a tiny house. One of the things I think that are key with tiny houses is that it's actually more about efficiency, efficient use of space, not so much about the smaller size. If you think about how much wasted space you have in hallways or in lounges where you might have a table in the corner of the room which you don't even use. By living in a tiny house, you actually take out all that wasted space. So you can see in the bottom right corner, that is my lounge. I've actually built shelving into the actual framing of the wall. You can't quite see it. Oh, you can see it in the top left, that all the stairs are storage stairs. So we're saving room by actually building many of the actual functional parts of the house into other parts. You can see on the top left as well where my fridge is. That's actually the landing for my loft. So when I walk up to my bedroom, even though I can't stand in the loft, I can stand on the landing, so I do still have somewhere that I can get dressed or get changed, and I can walk normally so that I'm not crawling. I mean, I'm 33, I feel more like 53 at the moment. We all probably do after 2020, right? But I still need to be able to have that space to be able to stand up, which is really interesting because there's quite the evolution in tiny houses is happening really quickly. And I'd say that's one of the key reasons is because the construction time is so quick. For a professional, it's only about 4 to 6 weeks. My one took quite a bit longer. I paid professionals, just not professional tiny house builders. And DIYs can take anywhere from sort of 6 to 12 to 18 months, depending on their level of skill and also how much free available time they've got. But because it's so much smaller and it can be built so much quicker, the learning cycle is faster, which means the evolution, the technology, the changes are happening so much quicker, which is something I really love. So my design is with all of the living on the bottom. So you can see I've got the kitchen on one end, I've got the bathroom on the other, and again, that bathroom, where I am in Auckland, I'm actually on the bottom of the garden of my business partner's house. And where I'm parked, so the property is zoned that you could have 3 dwellings there, but if you were to build 3 dwellings, you'd have to chop down all these native trees, you'd have to pipe up a creek, and it would absolutely just remove all the soul from the property. So what was great about us coming in is that we just simply slid the tiny house into an existing gap. We didn't have to chop anything down, we didn't have to pipe anything, we didn't have to destroy the property at all. And we're able to slide in, and when we're ready to go somewhere else, then we'll just slide right on out, and within 6 months to a year, the grass will have grown back, and it will be as if we've never been there. Even my deck, It doesn't have any concrete built into the ground. It's just a freestanding structure sitting on top of the ground. So that's one of the key reasons for me is sustainability. But where I was leading to with that is we do have my business partner on the same property. My bathroom is bigger than her bathroom, right? In a full-size 100 square meter house. So again, just because it's a tiny house doesn't mean that it's a compromise. For me, I'd say it's a bit more of just a lifestyle choice. It's just a change from the norm. And that's what I love about what your group is about, is about what are some of these alternative living arrangements or housing styles that we can start to look at. And hopefully, I don't know the purpose of why your group was set up, but hopefully we can use some of these to create more sustainable environmental solutions, but also affordable and help solve the homeless issue. I was actually working out today that we could solve housing and the homelessness issue almost overnight, because the problem isn't with the technology or the houses, the problem is with the system. So if I know Labor had talked about changing some things in the RMA, the Resource Management Act, but if we could be getting in there and freeing up all the red tape and bureaucracy in the system, then we could actually be solving a lot of these issues that people are facing. And that for me is where tiny houses are just one solution in the greater scheme of things. And then I've got my loft. So originally I did do it as 2 bedrooms. I wanted to be able to have friends coming over, staying the night, but after the first couple have stayed, I was like, no, don't want that again. And of course, after level 4 lockdown, I actually came and took the bed out and turned it into a little lounge with a TV, board games, and it completely changed the space till now we've got this little nest, this little snug up there, and that's actually where I am now. So it definitely gets used a lot. So why did I go tiny? People go tiny for different reasons, right? One of the biggest reasons people are going to share with you, or you'll hear when you're learning, or when you're researching it, is cost is a huge one. To put it in perspective, where I live on the North Shore in Auckland, my neighbour, she told me today, her property is worth 1.6 million. If I wanted to buy anywhere in this area, I'm looking at around about 1.5, 1.6 million. To put that in perspective, my tiny house I lay claim to having the most expensive tiny house in New Zealand at $200,000. So comparatively, like 1/7 of the cost, right? And yeah, I don't own the land, but I also don't need much land. So that's one of the biggest things for people. If you do a DIY, I've heard of people building them. I mean, the craziest is like $5,000, but to be honest, I don't think that's something we'd really want to live in. But typically, for a DIY where they use a lot of reclaimed materials and they don't value their own time in what they've put into the build, then they might be looking $30,000 to around about $80,000. To get a professionally built one, you're probably looking anywhere upwards of 100,000, and they're getting up to about 160 now. There is very much a difference in the types of tiny houses. You get, and I will touch on this soon, but you get what I call like a cabin on wheels, which is just a low cost, no frills. It's affordable housing, right? It's an affordable option for people who just need something. And then you get the custom builds for people who know what they want. They're looking at it maybe as a bit more of that homely feeling, or in my case, I wanted it to be a piece of art that I could live in. And I just went down to that nth degree. I put a lot of time into figuring out what the colours were going to be and what the layout was going to be, what the mixes and the contrasts, and absolutely everything was going to be. So many different why people go tiny, but for me it was all about freedom. For me, a tiny house is the epitome of freedom, to the point where it's on wheels. I am so free that if I don't like where I am, I can just hook it on the back of a truck, tow it away, and move somewhere completely different. I can have it unplugged. I have a caravan plug for power. I have just a hose plug for water, and the wastewater just goes into a tank at the back of the house and gets pumped up to the house, so there are no hard or no fixed connections there. So I could literally be unplugged within 5 minutes, on the road in 10, 20 minutes, and in my new location within an hour or two, depending on where I'm moving to. So that is for me the epitome of freedom. But the biggest reason why I went tiny is I had moved back before the pandemic. I don't think too many people are travelling at the moment, but I've spent the last 4 years travelling around Europe. I lived in Bali for a couple of years, and so for me it was all about freedom, but the tiny house represented a New Zealand base that wasn't going to cost the end of the earth, that I could just lock up and walk away with no worries, that I didn't have to worry about renting out or security or anything like that. I could leave at a friend's place and it wasn't going to be in their way. And that to me was the epitome of freedom. The other reason why I went tiny is they're freaking awesome. I mean, have you seen the tiny houses? Do I need to go back to Pinterest and Instagram, right? There are some amazing cutesy tiny houses out there. They are. You can have so much fun, and they're not going to cost the end of the world, end of the earth. And then finally, there is that whole sustainability factor. The way we build houses, just the construction industry is massive polluter on the planet. And of course, we spend hundreds of thousands building a house, which is only going to be there for a little while until we knock it down to build another house. It's nuts. I just don't understand it at all. So with the tiny house, it's a lot more sustainable on the planet, which I like as well. The other thing, as I mentioned, I do lay claim to the most expensive tiny house in New Zealand. For me, it represented the ability to be able to actually afford to have those high-end products, which if I was to buy a bigger house, then, something which might cost $100 per square metre in a tiny house becomes affordable, but $100 per square metre in a big house, I could only have one luxury item in that big house, right? Whereas when I went through it, the paint I chose was like $250 for 2 litres. Absolutely insane, but I didn't have very much square meterage to go by. Even being able to tile and having engineered stone benches was all because I wasn't spending too much money on the other side and the other places. And so that's where I think tiny houses really come into their own, and you're able to have that sort of higher end home, but without that high end cost. I do call mine a tiny mansion because it is a little bit bigger than your typical tiny house, but also because I did put that extra bit of money into the products that I was using. So that's enough of me. I want to talk a little bit about the association. The association was set up last year, and we do have members all across the country, including some people down in Southland, which is really nice. And there are a few statistics there so you can sort of see we are 50-50 with women. And actually, I'll get into this a little bit later, but we just had the Tiny House and Alternative Living Conference up here in Auckland over just the previous weekend that's just gone by. And every single one of our speakers was female, bar one, which was a couple. So it's interesting, and even within the industry, it does seem to be women who are leading this sort of alternative housing industry, at least from what I'm seeing, which is quite amazing. And I do refer back to the Dalai Lama quote that the world will be saved by the Western woman. And I'm wondering, hey, is this just one aspect of that? So I I find that absolutely fascinating, and yeah, girl power to all the girls in the crowd there. Definitely, you can be making this happen. But as you can, like, if you think about who the typical tiny house owner is, I would say there isn't one. It is almost diverse as who is a typical homeowner. We have everyone. I've seen everything from people wanting to leave home, but not being able to afford their own place, so they build a tiny house and sort of put it in the backyard, to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, to elderly people looking to come back home and live with their adult children, but still retain some sort of independence. I've seen it used by couples and singles and families. I think the biggest I've seen is 6 people living in a tiny house. And that was done as an affordable living option because rent for a family of 6 was just too high for what the parents could earn. Right down to Airbnb and holiday houses. I've seen it used for just family members or people who need to look after sick or mentally disabled or physically disabled family members, and they're looking for someone to come into their backyard. I've even seen it for someone who had to come to Auckland regularly for hospital checkups, and they wanted their own space. They didn't want to be staying in a hotel or anything, so they purchased a tiny house and they put it on someone's land. It's a great option for those who have bought land and they want to live. Typically, stereotypical would be buy the land, live in a caravan for a while. Now you're just living in a much flasher, bigger, better caravan per se. One of the big, driving factors or wants that I'm seeing come through the community at the moment is to be able to live in tiny house communities or little tiny house villages. And that's what I'm working on in my business. I'll get onto that in a minute. But yeah, there really is no stereotypical tiny houser. It might have started financially, if you go back far enough, 70s, 80s, probably with the hippies, that would be the closest. But now it's starting to become trendy. It's starting to become almost the norm, or quite acceptable. So the association, we set that up in order to assist people, particularly planners, policymakers, and the wider community, just to understand the movement, understand what some of the laws are, and how to work within it. One of the we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot by calling it a tiny house, because when you go to council and you talk about a tiny house, most people understand the concept of what a house is. But a tiny house really is just a very fancy caravan. So that would be probably one of the first pieces of advice I'd give to you if you are looking to get into this sort of area. So we formed last year, and we've worked since then. It's been a hell of a year, I'll give you that, even without COVID. So we've been working with licensed building practitioners to form best practice guidelines. A tiny house on wheels cannot meet code of compliance for a number of reasons. Typically, ceiling height, stairs often don't quite meet the rules, but also foundations, because we don't have foundations. There are a few things around there. So we've worked with licensed building practitioners to be able to create some guidelines to support safe and healthy tiny homes and get it as close to the building code, or close to the purpose of why the building code was created in the first place. We're also currently working with the Greens Party on a member-sponsored bill in order to create a framework on how councils and other governments can adapt to the tiny house movement and get something passed to just give everyone ease, because it is still a very grey area. And I know you have someone from Invercargill Council, I think, sharing with you a little bit about compliance in Invercargill. And we might disagree on a few things. It is still a very grey area. But each one of these in the picture, that one on the left, that is a tiny house on wheels. It's just got a little bit of skirting put around the trailer. So it can be very confusing for everyone involved. So let's get into it then. What is a tiny house, or what is a tiny house on wheels? There's actually no formal definition, and it's quite funny. So my tiny house is about 30 square meters, and I've had people tell me, people who live in 100 square meter houses tell me, oh yeah, I live in a tiny house. So I'm like, no, you don't. You might live in a small house compared to the rest of the country or something, but I don't consider 270 square meters a normal house. That is a giant house. If I live in a tiny house, 270 square meters is a giant house. That's just ridiculous. You don't need that much stuff. But typically we're talking about, we sort of worked off the framework from America, which is 400 square feet. So that's around about 37 or so square meters. So if we look at what a tiny house as a structure is, it's got the character and functionality of a permanent house. It's fixed to the land, and it's usually a similar scale to a large caravan or recreational vehicle. We're not going to talk about tiny houses as a structure any further, and we don't work with those within the association at all, because the law and the building code is very clear on that. However, where it does differ is when we talk about a tiny house on wheels. So a tiny house on wheels is different to a house truck, in that a house truck or a house bus or a house boat they are motor-driven vehicle. A tiny house on wheels is built onto a trailer and it's towed by another vehicle. So that's probably the key definition between them all. It's still got the character and the functionality of a permanent house, but it's not fixed to the land. It is a mobile unit, and it can be compared to a large caravan. I mean, in my eyes, it's no different to a caravan. I've got caravan plugs, I've got caravan electrical warranty fitnesses and gas warranty fitnesses, etc. It just looks a bit different from what most people think when they think of the word caravan. So, what are the guidelines? Well, actually, there aren't any. I'm going to get into this in a minute when we look at some IMBY determinations. But really, if you look at it, if it's a house on wheels and it's movable, then theoretically, I mean, you shouldn't need building consent. I'll get into that in a minute. But there is a general consensus amongst most of the groups, different associations, tiny house builders in New Zealand, that a tiny house will typically follow the guidelines set out with Land Transport New Zealand as a light, simple trailer. So that is a maximum of 12.5 metres long, 4.3 metres high, and 2.55 metres wide. However, a lot of people, myself included, make use of the over-width load rules, which might see you go out to 3.1 metres, which means you have to, if you are moving on the road, you have to have sort of flags and lights and, you know, a few little things like that. You can theoretically go bigger, you just have to have pilot vehicles if you are moving on the road. But typically you will see tiny houses that are over 2.55, or nowadays a lot of them are around that 3.1 metre. Now, as a light trailer, theoretically, I mean, under the rules, it should be a maximum of 3.5 tonnes. This is extremely difficult to do in a tiny house. Like, you start thinking everything in your house and then imagine it in a trailer. It's going to be heavy. So one of the things some people do is they make it that things can come out. Kitchen cabinets can come out, stairs can come out, all the material, all the furniture, etc. can come out. Or I believe some people, I've never had to move mine, so I don't know what people do, but I think some tow trucks, etc. can get permits to be able to tow heavier. So those are some of the options you have available. As I said, you could go for a heavy trailer, which allows you to build much heavier, to a heavier weight. However, then you have to do, I believe, it's 6 monthly COFs and quite a bit of other compliance. There are arguments that as a vehicle or as a trailer, it should be registered and warranted. If you read through the IMB determinations, if you ever are challenged by council, and it does go to an IMB determination or even court, that is one factor they will look at if it is registered and warranted. However, a registration and a warrant of fitness is only relevant to the road. So, make your own decision. Which brings us to IMB. So, this has been last year in particular, and this was why the association was formed. There were a lot of notices to fix going out. There are a lot of arguments, and it was all kind of settled this year in February when Alan Dahl from Amberley went to the Court of Appeals to appeal his tiny house being ruled as a building. You can find that determination, the judge's sentence, online really easily. It is, if you are interested into in getting, building, buying, whatever, living in a tiny house, it would be worth you finding that determination and reading it just to see what was going through the judge's head when he wrote it or when he ruled in favour of the tiny house being a vehicle. And that's also where he mentioned that warrant and rego don't make a building a vehicle or a vehicle. And well, let's go back and I'll talk you through it. So this is how they work it out, right? The first step in deciding when a vehicle will be required to be treated as a building is if it doesn't meet the terms defined in the Act as being a vehicle or a motor vehicle. So a vehicle is a thing used for transporting people or goods, especially on land, such as a car, lorry, or a cart, or a motor vehicle, i.e. a road vehicle powered by an internal combustion engine. And this is why I say a tiny house isn't comparable to a motorhome or a house truck. And it also refers to a vehicle in the natural meaning as defined in the Land Transport Act, most notably that it's oh my god, you can read that, equipped with wheels, tracks or revolving runners of some sort of which it is moved. Or a motor vehicle, which means it's a vehicle drawn up propelled by mechanical power and includes a trailer. So that's probably the key thing there, right? If you want to be a vehicle, it's got to have wheels of some sort. There are some, I've never tested it, but I would say misinformation saying that you can have a tiny house on skids. If I was sinking a whole heap of money into a tiny house, I wouldn't be relying on that when the law or the previous determinations have been quite clear. So, if a particular structure is a vehicle, it will only then be treated as a building for the purposes of the Act if it also satisfies the two further requirements in section blah blah blah, and these are that the vehicle must be immovable and occupied by people on a permanent or long-term basis. There was a precedent set by the Thames Coromandel Council in which a campground had a caravan with no wheels, and they argued that it wasn't a building, it was a vehicle, but the outcome was that it was a building. And so that sort of set precedent for everything going forward as to what the definition of a vehicle is versus what the definition of a building is. So that's one of the key things of why you need to have wheels. And they need, the closer you can be to being a proper road functioning vehicle, the more likely you are to win in court, basically. So the outcome of what we've learned is that a vehicle is only considered a building if it is immovable and lived in permanently. It needs to meet both of those, immovable and lived in permanently. We have found cases within me where it was very obvious that the vehicle wasn't movable and was classified as a building, but because it wasn't lived in permanently, and that again is a bit subjective, what the word permanently or long-term means, but because it wasn't lived in permanently, it wasn't classified as a building under the Act. So yes, I know that's all very confusing, but basically put wheels on it, keep it registered, keep it warranted, make sure that it is a proper vehicle and you shouldn't have any issues. In saying that, there are still some cases that will require building or resource consent. So this will be things such as septic tanks, wastewater, anything to do with that. Plugging into existing sewer, something like that will need building or resource consent. Decking could quite possibly need resource consent. If you're doing anything with stormwater or earthworks, all of that will quite possibly need resource consent or building consent. So make sure you do check with a planner before you go doing anything. The other thing is that there are two sides of council. There is building and there's also planning. So whilst a tiny house is not a building, it can be considered a dwelling if you live in it permanently. So therefore you will have other parts of council and planning rules which will apply to you, most notably zoning rules, and this is why we talk about the property I'm on is zoned for 3 dwellings. So under that side of things, it's fine for me to live permanently in the tiny house. So that's density, height to boundary ratios, recession planes, turning circles, all these sorts of things are still applicable to you as a dwelling if you live in it permanently. So they're just things to take into consideration when you are looking to go tiny. One of the problems with the tiny house movement, or that I've found trying to set up these communities, is that the reality is if you can put a tiny house there, you can usually put a big normal house there. So often it's not financially feasible to put multiple tiny houses on a site, because I could just as easily subdivide and put big houses on a site and make a lot more money. And yeah, that's just a reality. The way I'm going about it with my company is I've had to resort to just buying campgrounds, turning campgrounds into tiny house parks. However, it does mean we have to comply with the Campgrounds Act, which means we can't stay more than 50 days. So we're not trying to do permanent tiny house communities. We're trying to do holiday home type tiny house communities, which is a shame, but hey, I'm 33. I've got a little while to go until I curl up and go underground. So hopefully we've got a bit of time up our sleeve to keep working on those rules, and hopefully one day we will be able to make it that we can have tiny house communities where people live in them permanently. So what are the pros and cons of actually living in a tiny house? The pros, obviously affordability, flexibility, little harm to the environment. They're relatively easy to build by yourself because you don't quite have that same compliance. It's a better return on investment for investors. You can maximize your living space without actually having to develop. You can declutter. There's a lot less consumerism. I only have a certain number of drawers. If it doesn't fit, I can't buy it. And that's the rules for Christmas. No Christmas presents, please. Got nowhere to put it. Sustainability, and also that temporary nature. The idea that I can just take it away and the earth will, Mother Nature will do her thing. Many of the cons, they're difficult to finance and you cannot use your KiwiSaver for them. They are a vehicle, so as a vehicle loan, you're talking a lot higher interest rates than the 2.5 you can get through the banks at the moment. Toilets, you can't talk about tiny houses without talking about toilets. Often they're not flush toilets, so they are, boat type toilets, chemical toilets, composting toilets, which means that you're getting a little bit closer to your business than you would in a flush toilet. Let's just say I'll never complain about a skid mark in a flush toilet again. Land can be quite difficult to find and you don't own it. Also, the Residential Tenancies Act doesn't apply, so you need to have good paperwork in place because you're not protected otherwise. Security, I have got a friend who's a builder who had their tiny house stolen. So, when someone can just hook your house up to a car and drive off, you might have a little bit of a problem. And it is an unregulated industry and it is a new industry. So there are still, I think there were a few cowboys in the industry right at the start of it getting started. I don't know of any now, but there are. It seems like every month there's a new player coming in, and they don't need to be licensed or anything. So it's something buyer beware basically when you are buying. A few case studies of how tiny houses have worked in a real world environment. This is Gabriella. She's from Wellington. She built her own tiny house as part of a school project. It cost her $26,000. She pretty much became famous from it. But $26,000 at what, 18, 17 or something, and she's never had to pay rent, she's never had to pay a mortgage, and she's been able to live or travel wherever she's wanted. So what a way to come out of school. And another one which for me hits home quite hard in the heart is you can see this made news this month actually. Where Island Child, a not-for-profit up here in Auckland, created a bit of a tiny house village where they take on the homeless and they get them sorted, get them back on track, and then find Ministry of Social Development housing for them. And the way they did it is they've made use of the 30 square metre rules which have recently come out. So these tiny houses don't have kitchens or bathrooms in them. They are just a 30 square metre bedroom per se with a fridge in there. And they operate as a boarding house, which I thought was a really cool way to look at it. I can't remember how many people she said they've helped, but I think they've got 30 of these little cabin tiny houses. And they're really starting to be able to make a difference to people's lives, which is something I really love. In the US especially, there are a lot of tiny house villages opening up for veterans, for the homeless, and it really is changing people's lives. Even just a way to get them off the streets and get them back on track. So there are a variety of different applications you can use. You can use tiny houses for. Like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. I wouldn't say there's a single stereotype of who lives in a tiny house. But I gotta say, I'm an absolute addict. Absolutely love them. One more case study. This was from over the weekend. So this is Charla. She helps set up the association, but she also runs the conference. And those are just a few numbers to sort of give you insight into how fast the movement is growing. So from 330 people coming in Auckland last year to 3,900 people this year. Noted, they did do just a trade show this year, so it wasn't just people coming to listen at the conference, but it's quite insane how fast it's growing. Ever since COVID, every tiny house builder I know has been completely flat out. And the reality is, despite what's happening with houses and stuff at the moment, we still expect there to be some sort of economic crash. And the reality is that lower priced housing usually holds its value, whereas higher priced housing takes the biggest hit. And where is the market that people can always fall back to? They can always fall back to cabins on wheels and tiny houses on wheels. So I just see this movement getting bigger and bigger, unfortunately for some of the bad reasons, in that we are likely to have a recession and people won't have any other choice. But I think there's also a major mindset shift amongst millennials, amongst the Generation Z, into how we want to live, and not just from the I can't afford to buy a house sort of avenue. So that brings me to the end, and if you'd like to ask away, I did speak for a bit. I've got about 5 or 10 minutes that I can answer questions for.
Right, Colin, have you got the other mic? Right.
Oh, sorry, I muted you. Let me unmute you. You might have to unmute yourself just on your computer.
Is that working?
There we go. Yep.
Thank you very much. Well, did you take all that in?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Kyron, I have to tell you, our compliance officer was smiling and nodding.
Oh, that's good. I hope. It's an awkward relationship with councils because, like I said, we are sort of in a grey area. There might be a few disagreements about some of the meetings, but hey, I have had an Auckland Council compliance officer come to my house. He was only interested in the wastewater, which I got all fixed up and signed off. He did say it was the best mobile house he'd ever seen, mobile home. And I was like, I'll remember that one. I'll refer to it as a mobile home from now on.
Right, questions. There's a microphone down the back that Colin has got. I guess I can take this one off. And... No, I can't.
Who's got the question?
I've got a big enough voice, but anyway.
No, it's going to be recorded.
Oh, okay. Yeah, hi there, Kyron. So I'm going to ask about lofts. I live with a spinal disorder and I've had 2 back surgeries, yet to have more. And therefore I can't go loft. So I'm currently looking at my options for both myself and my son to have one tiny home each. And so I can't have a loft. So what do you suggest for like sizing and putting sleeping area on the ground, you know, just having that one floor, because then it's going to take away space from everything else. And
Yep. So there are plenty of companies out there who do single level tiny houses or cabins on wheels. So when I talk to people about designing a tiny house, I always say you're going to come up with one room, and that's going to be the most important. For me, it was the kitchen, but because I wanted the 2 bedrooms, it meant the bathroom had to be the same size, right? But for you, the preference is the bedroom, then design the tiny house around the bedroom. Another thing you might look at doing, and you'd have to figure out how exactly that works. Luckily, you have a compliance officer in the room. But if you and your son both had a tiny house each, they would be classed as 2 dwellings, which means you'd have to be in the right zoning that would allow for 2 dwellings. But if you had it where you had all the ablutions and everything in one, and then the bedrooms in the other, or you had 2 separate sort of bedrooms on wheels, or even work to the 30 square metre rule, right? Then that, I don't know how that would be classed under council, but I mean, theoretically, 1 dwelling, right?
I want some peace, mate.
Well, you can put him down the other end of the garden and give him a lemon tree to pee on.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? There you are.
It was 2, not 26.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment about your thing. Surely today what you need is a 40-foot container. And particularly nowadays, a 9 foot high container. Because if you've got to insulate the floor and the ceiling, if it's 9 foot inside, you can do that. If it's an 8 foot container, you'll have to either insulate it on the top or the bottom. So, and the other thing is that I've seen a container in February at the show there that they have in Gore every couple of years out at Waimumu. And there was a 40-foot container there. It was a new container, but it didn't have doors at either end. It had two hinged doors on one side, which when they were opened, they opened up at least half the length of the container. And they would be ideal. You could use those and have a deck out there, and when you moved somewhere, you could fold the deck up and the roof down and close the doors.
Right, comments, Kyron, did you hear all that?
Yep, I heard all that. So there is a separate niche for container homes. And yeah, there's nothing stopping you, I guess, putting a container on a trailer and turning it into a tiny house on wheels. If you do a container on foundations, it needs to be council compliant as a building. But yeah, if it's on a trailer, there's nothing stopping you doing that. I do know from people who have done container buildings, because it's steel, it can get very hot or very cold in there. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you doing that.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi there, Kyron. I'm just wondering the insulation. What type of insulation are they? Are they like fifth weather, or you've got a special different kind of the insulation?
So, I'd have to look what we said in building rules. This is a great thing, right? Because people build them all themselves, so you can put whatever insulation you want in. Mine is built out of what's called SIPS panels, which means structurally insulated panel. So my wall, my internal wall, my external wall, all the insulation, all the framing, everything just goes up in one panel. So it's like a sandwich panel. So my tiny house is actually like 7 times the minimum R code that the council, that the building code stipulates. A lot of people use earth wool because that's a bit more environmentally friendly. But you know, there's nothing stopping you using pink bats or anything. It comes down to what sort of framing you use. If you're using timber, I know that a lot of builders, what do they use? There's a reason why I paid someone to build mine, right? I'm not that out there, but I think is it 3x2? They might use 3x2 timber, or else they use steel. So you can use any insulation. Yeah.
So could you just explain that earth one that you spoke of?
Well, earth wool is just a different product.
Oh, wool.
I don't think it's actual wool, like I don't think it's sheep's wool, but it's a more natural alternative to something like pink bats, I believe.
Thank you.
Looks a bit like pink bats.
Kyron, I want to know about your electricity. Are you off the grid with some type of battery, or are you using gas?
So I use gas for my stove and my hot water, but I'm definitely urban. So we had an electrician hook up a caravan lead to the main house, and I've just got 32 amp caravan plug-in, literally just a normal caravan plug-in, no different to anything you'd see on any other caravan.
So
I've only had it trip once, and that was when we had 2 ovens, the microwave, the TV, and the dishwasher on.
So I'm going to ask the health and safety. Is it piped, the cord? How do you take the safety into consideration from you to the house?
Oh yeah, it was all done by an electrician and all done properly and signed off.
Right.
Yeah, I hate electricity. There's no way in hell I'm playing with any of that stuff. Do it right, you know. And same with the gas. The gas was all signed off by a proper gas fitter.
Thank you. I'm just raising the warning to those who are listening. Don't have a cord draped across the dewy lawn. Who's next, Colin?
Looking at your caravan, big pardon, tiny home, it looked fairly, is this on?
Yes, it is.
It looked fairly high to me. My question is, the lines across the road, do you have any trouble going under any lines? Obviously you don't, it's a silly question, or you wouldn't build it, but it looked quite high to me to escape these lines that go across the road.
So that's where I brought up the land transport light trailer dimensions, because that's national legislation, right? And so they say maximum of 4.3 high, because they know what high power lines are, right? So mine's built to 4.3 high, so I'm the absolute max I can go. One of the reasons it does look high, my tiny house looks high, is because where I live, I'm near a stormwater creek. And when I spoke to the council, they said, yeah, you're allowed to live in a tiny house, in a caravan permanently, but that is a floodplain, so you cannot impede flood waters. And so we deliberately raised my tiny house up by about 1 metre on these foundations in order to not impede the flood waters. So that's why it looks a bit higher than it actually is.
Okay, Kyron needs to get away. Is there one more question? Right. Thank you very much. It's covered so much more ground than I anticipated. I hope you found that it was good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. We're now going to shift to our second speaker. Do I need a technician up here? Yes, I do. Okay. You just sit yourself down here and I'll introduce you. It'll take. Sure. You've seen what I'm going to say, except I'm only doing half that now.
Okay.
So it'll take a long time. Okay. So here to give a local perspective, we're going to hear Brad Gibson. And what do I know about Brad? I've just met him tonight. And his friend Jeremy didn't say much to me about you, except that you were a former SIT student and you did your final dissertation on tiny houses. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And he's now a tiny house dweller in Southland. And if he wants to tell you where it is, he will tell you. So please welcome Brad Gibson. You might want to put the microphone up.
I'm not going to sit down.
Or Neil.
Did you want it in front of you, Brad, or?
It's going on here.
That
should be right. Move forward. So I can click that down. Hello. Oh, yeah. Okay, so my name's Brad, and Jeremy Bond was the person that teed this up and got me to come along. He was in my class at SIT for environmental management, which I graduated not last year, but the year before. Yeah, time flies. So I started looking at building or buying a tiny home at the start of my study. So it was about early 2016, and at the time there was almost no tiny home sort of companies available, and there was bugger all on sort of like Trade Me and that kind of thing. So I ended up going with a company called My House, these guys here, which are based in Christchurch. I went with the cheapest model, which is the Aston on the top left there. They do a whole bunch more, which can range from, I think, just over 60 to about 150. So they do shells as well. So I opted to get the shell done to their basic plan and have it moved to the site in Southland and finish the guts while I was finishing the degree. So they make everything on site. They actually flew me up to Christchurch before I signed any contracts or anything, just to make sure that they were all legit. And they showed me around their facilities. It's a family-run business, so dad is a builder, mum is the admin sort of person, and their son is also a builder there as well. So everything is steel frame construction, which I opted for over timber, just because I knew I'd be packing it with a lot of stuff, and its weight would go up very, very quickly. And of course there is the limit on the road of 3.5 tonne. So they actually roll it all out from one big roll of sheet steel and press all the framing as they need it. They send you photos as the build goes through, and you pay quarterly as well. So I did use earthwool. It has an R value of 2.2. And everything is lined on the inside with basically a form of marine ply. So they recommended that I whitewash everything, but ended up painting it myself. So this is what it looked like basically when it turned up to the property in Southland. So it's basically just a plywood box. It's got two lofts. One's got a wee bit of a cutaway at the top there for like a ladder to lean into. All the wires are just hanging out of the wall. So when it turned up, I was equally excited as I was sort of freaked out by the whole thing. So I just chipped away at it over the course of about 2 to 3 years.
Where you living?
So mum and dad own a property in Southland, and they have a huge property with more rooms than they could possibly need and more land than they can possibly occupy. So I said, Mum. So that was really cool. So that's still where it is today, and I'll be looking at buying land within a year's time also. That's actually the day it turned up. So it was actually behind this crazy car, I'm not quite sure what it is. And it came down from Christchurch in a single day, and it cost $600 to, yeah. So my house actually teed that up for me as well. They basically hold your hand through the whole process, which is good, because I had a lot of study to do. So this is the dimensions of it. So 7.2 long, 2.4 wide, and 4 meters, or 4.2 from the ground to the very top. So it does have a double axle trailer, 3.5 tonne legal towing capacity, electric brakes. So the floor area downstairs is a little under 18 metres squared, but it does have 2 lofts as well, which puts it up to about 26, 27, something like that. And a standard 3-pin caravan power outlet. So, much like the previous presentation, so I use 2 gas bottles, just 9 kgs, which powers my hot water and my gas burner as well. So that's just what your ordinary 3-pin plug looks like. If you guys haven't seen one of them, it's a standard connection. The tiny house is situated right beside a big garage, so I can just run the extension cable under the corrugated iron straight to Dad's shed. Thanks, Dad. So this is something that I did for my 3rd year project. So a lot of people will buy a tiny home, and then where they put it is often an afterthought. So a lot of people don't think about what they're going to do with their waste. There are early stories that I've heard through the grapevine of people taking the cowboy approach and doing something that they've just seen online. In this case, it's an artificial wetland. Plants, as you know, will uptake nutrients and clean water, but how effective is it really? So this was part of the idea for the 3rd year project. So all of this is just built out of recycled timber, the sheeting we had lying around, and the bathtubs I got for free from the local dump. And in each one of them is a layer of, say, charcoal, gravel, and bark chips. The idea here is that so both bathtubs have 2 varieties of native plant in it. It's a pretty bad photo, to be fair, but in the one behind there are 6 native grasses, Caraxecta, which we often use for riparian planting on our waterways. And there's 6 plants in this one, Epidesmia similis, or oioi, which you can find in wetlands. So the idea would be that it would clean water really well, right? And firstly, all the water that flows from the house gets collected into a settling tank where it sort of can be mixed and become homogeneous, and will drain out equal volumes into both bathtubs. And where those two lids are at the end there, I can pop a wee cap off and put a water sampling bottle underneath and take it straight to Clifton Wastewater Laboratories. So I would do that once, if not twice a week, for a couple of months, testing the fresh water, the water in the grey water tank, and then the water after each sort of treatment bath there. Basically, to get the idea is to see which plant does a better job and if the actual process is legit. So this is just a proof of concept sort of thing. So these are just original water testing results. So this is the rainwater tank coming straight from our roof. So if you're not too aware of like what these numbers mean, basically that's a really, really pure sample. pH is a bit low, but other than that, it's really, really clean water. So that's all my water sources there: shower, bathroom, kitchen, and washing machine. So I have basically restriction valves, or whatever you want to call them, on all my appliances. So I use very, very little water from the get-go. And I do have a composting toilet. It's a Nature's Head one. So there's no urine or number twos or anything like that going into this. So basically it'll just flow through here, allow about, the way it's sort of structured, it'll allow for about a day of water retention in both bathtubs before it gets flushed out. The pipes reconnect and it gets distributed under a sand trench, basically like an ordinary grey water system, with other native varieties planted on top. Just like that. So I could talk about that all day. That was what my dissertation was on, but long story short, the Carrick sector, the grass variety, was much, much better at performing grey water treatment than the native reeds were, which was interesting to me. But as far as sort of water cleanliness goes, at the end, on average, there was, I think, one result, which I think was probably a bit of an anomaly from one singular water test. But all the rest of them were below the national average for subsurface grey water disposal. So yes, it does work. Things like E. coli got really, really high in the grey water tank, and by the time they were disposed of, it was 0. Conductivity went up because there's a lot of sort of food, sort of salts and that kind of thing getting into the water, but it went down considerably after being treated. Total suspended solids sort of get trapped in the root structure of the plants and went down considerably. pH ended up being sort of level by the time it was treated, by around 7 to about 8. Nitrogen and phosphorus went down and BRD went considerably down. So this is just what it looks like now, up to date. If you guys might want to see some photos. So it's all colour steel. This is just downstairs on the lounge. So I'm not a builder by any stretch, but Google and YouTube are your friends. Basically, if somebody's done it, like somebody's done it out there, and somebody has a way to do it, and they will teach you. So just look it up. They don't have a wide-angle camera, which is a shame. You'd be able to see a lot more. So this is all still downstairs. So the ladder actually has two of those big heavy hooks that hold 90 kgs each on the top. So that fits into that groove on the top where that sort of cutaway is for the loft. And it just sits on a rail against the wall and is not in use. So there's a few things that still need done. I need to finish the cabinetry here, connect some of this stuff here, extraction fan and railing for the staircase. It's looking in the other direction. The bed, most of this sort of stuff that, like all this furniture was free from family members, or sort of like this bookshelf thing has moved with me in every flat I've ever been in. So I didn't really have a basic plan laid out when I purchased the tiny house. I basically just bought their low-end shell and just built it as I seen fit, as time would allow. So I did have to somewhat make things fit as I go, but it was kind of the challenge and it was kind of fun at the same time. So this is one loft, basically that's just a king single. This sort of base here slides out and you can fit any sort of mattress you want up there. It can hold up to a queen. And it's basically just a lounge for games and TV and that kind of thing. Looking from the outside, this is the bedroom. Looking from the other side. So those areas at the top here are just garden trellis. They have a wee bit of a framing around the outside now, and it's just fake ivy, just as a way to sort of separate the spaces. So, what did it cost? So the shell itself was about 60 grand, which is expensive in today's terms because a lot of people can actually just outright buy a tiny home for about 60 grand. And it is about probably close to 90 to 95 now, and to be honest, I stopped keeping invoices some time ago. So FMG was able to insure it for close to $70 a month as a caravan, which is the cheapest quote that I could sort of find. AMI charged me twice that. I called them up to tell them that FMG was going to do it for half the price, and it was actually covered for more things, and they just said, okay, bye. So they weren't really willing to budge or help out at all. So one thing that wasn't raised in the last presentation was it's a new caravan, right? So it's got a 3-year loft or rego. So what happens when it runs out and you want to get it renewed? By law, you actually have to take it to the site, which is an absolute mission. So I called around Southland at different mechanical sort of places and asked about this, and they said, no, we have to do the tests on site. We can't do call-outs. So I thought, shit. So off to Facebook and had a bit of it's the only thing I use Facebook for, and asked around, and someone who's obviously gone through this before, and long story short, I deregistered it, so it no longer requires any of that, and it can sit on site, and it is still covered by FMG. By the time I go to move it, it's still covered on the road, whether it is registered or not. Great question. Great question. Yeah, so...
No, but actually your car is too. I always thought that if you had an accident when your car's not warranted or registered that you're not covered, but insurance company recently told me that it's only not covered if the accident was caused by a defect that would have been picked up by the not being registered. So that in line with what they're saying there.
Yeah, so handy to know. Some companies will finance a tiny home as well if you can't outright pay for them. Some like MTF is definitely one of them as well.
MTF, can I just say something? I contacted MTF recently, well, in the last fortnight, because I thought that they were the go-to for caravans and stuff like that. And I didn't know that I shouldn't have said something at the time. Maybe I put my foot in it, but then I thought, well, it was interesting to know what they're saying. But they said that they would not be providing me with the finance to do what I wanted to do with a caravan/tiny home, because they would not be putting people into hardship by living in them full time. And I said, well, hang on, who said I'm going into hardship? I want to live in this lifestyle. I choose to live in this lifestyle. I'm not,
Yeah.
And they just said, no, we're putting people into hardship. No.
More like it's too hard to ask it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I've been to the bank and my city councils, SDC and ICC, just last week to try and learn a bit more. So the bank was pretty much unwilling to budge for me. I am with Westpac. So with them, you buy land, you need 50% deposit as opposed to 20% for a conventional house. A lot of people don't have that, including myself. And KiwiSaver was quite interesting. I got in touch with them directly and they explained a few things to me. So you can use your tiny home to to buy land, provided that you put a house on it within 12 months. And that also extends, this is what they told me, even for translocatable homes. And they said that would extend to the tiny house as well. Now, I have owned land in the past and sold it. So before you go ahead and do something like this, make sure that you get in touch with your housing authorities or something, because you might have a second chance buyer sort of thing, which so like you got to buy a house or land to put your house on, but if you've had assets like that in the past, there's rules around KiwiSaver, so just be aware of that kind of thing. And obviously you have to live in it as well, and the IRD apparently do check up on you, and yeah, of course they do. So legalities, so this is just what I've been told, so anecdotal, and I don't want to step on any important people's toes in the audience here. But the ICC and the STC basically told me much of the same thing. So if you want to put your tiny home on a section and your tiny home is considered a building, it is not defined as a vehicle. Quite simply, building consent is required for the relocation of that building to the site, and consents need to cover foundations and on-site services, grey water, effluent, all that sort of stuff, and must be verified to meet the New Zealand Building Code regulations. So I'm a little bit dubious about that when it comes to myself, because I built my own staircase in the space that I was able to build my staircase. So if I built it on more of an angle, it would have cut across one of the lower bottom windows there, which is probably something my house didn't think about in their early sort of plans. So I think my tiny home was either the second or third they had sort of ever sold. So that's sort of like an alpha build. And I'm hoping that sort of got the design sorted when it comes to that kind of thing. But yeah, I'd be worried about the pitch of my stairs being a little too steep. But they are removable, so in the event that something like that happens, I could build something else to fit. Yeah, so you want to put it on a section and it's still considered a vehicle. They also told me that's fine. It's not defined as a building, but in that situation, I can't use KiwiSaver to buy land. And you still need builder consent for your effluent, stormwater, water, electricity. Does not require New Zealand Building Code. So general quotes, I had a friend build a house some time ago and he said, look, if you're ever going to do something like this, work out your land, house, building costs, everything you think of, and times it by 3. Because there's always going to be crazy overheads, even if you think you're within budget. So on-site septic tanks can be, around 15 grand, if not more. Building code inspections probably cost you money. Building consents for on-site services. The foundations, the transport of the house to where you're going. Driveway curbing. Years ago when I went into the ICC to ask about this for the early section that I owned, because it didn't have the area chipped away so you can drive up on an angle into your driveway. And they said it would cost $5,000 minimum to do something like that. Water tanks as well, pumps, and of course lawyers' fees. So mine is pretty much basically what you've seen in the last presentation, but yeah, minimalistic lifestyle is a great thing. I definitely spend less on sort of luxury items because I just have nowhere to put them, which saves money, which is great. And it's more than spacious enough for me personally. It's extremely warm, extremely dry, and extremely quiet. In fact, it can get extremely warm to the point of uncomfortable, because on a hot sort of summer's day, you wake up in the morning or something like that, and all your windows are closed, it is just so hot. On a really, really cold day, I currently don't even have a heat pump in there. The only thing I have is like a little fan desk heater, and I run it for about an hour, and I am comfortable. Yeah, so like I said, no building skills, and as you go, you'll learn them. They are extremely invaluable. It's an initial cheaper cost than a conventional house. My home can sleep up to 3 couples, which I have done a few times in the past. So pros and cons maybe there. Transportable, like Kyron was saying. So if I don't like where I am, I can probably work something else out and go. Low heating, electric and gas costs because of the size.
Because of Dad.
Yeah, thanks Dad. So composting toilet, I sort of ummed and ahed about that, but I would put it in the cons. They are quite expensive if you want to buy, like my Nature's Head one was about $2,000. And I don't know if you guys have seen them or know the concept, but basically, and if you're squeamish, sorry, but you basically sit down on it and it's got a wee lever and you push it open and number 2s will fall into a compartment in the back. Number 1s go into a tank on the front. So where I am, I dilute it, my number 1s to sort of half-half and walk along an established pine tree belt and dispose of it along there. And number 2s, I built like a wee composting system outside. And over about a year's time or so, that compost I sort of cut with a bit of ordinary mix, and I've actually successfully grown native plants in that. You probably wouldn't want to grow vegetables in that. But, And obviously, like Kyron was saying, additional land and legal costs, and everything is currently a bit of a grey area. High deposits for bare land, 50%, and may not pass building code because of the steepness of my staircase. This is something that probably hasn't been brought up, but it is in a pretty sheltered position where it's sitting at the moment, flanked by a shed and the pine tree belt. But when the weather is extremely windy and you're upstairs where you feel it most, it feels like this. Not to the point of being dangerous, but enough to sort of maybe put some people off, which is something people haven't really thought about. If it was on a foundation, it would be fine, because it'd be fixed. And of course, I still hit my head on the ceiling occasionally. Been sleeping in there for a couple of years and still haven't learned my lesson. Questions?
Can I just get you to reverse so I can take a photo of the one with the plants? You've got the photo of the plants, but then there's the diagram, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
It was the diagram that had the names of the plants on them. With the two.
Yeah. The names of the plants were Carexceptor and Apodesmia similis. Yeah,
I'm typing into my phone. It's easier to thank you. It was, yeah, that was it. Thank you.
No worries.
Those bloody tutors teaching you that language.
Any other questions? The microphone's down the back. There's one over there, Colin.
Some people may have a problem insuring them. I've got a caravan and I run state. Years ago they did insure it. Now they won't insure it.
Did they say what?
I said to them, it's not a permanent site in a caravan park. I go up to it. I don't put it on the road. And that's why they insured it years ago. And I went with another company later and I'm going back to state again with some of my stuff. And I thought, well, I'll see about the caravan while I'm at it now. And the person I struck the other day, well last week, said, oh no, we don't insure it. And I said, but they said it's a caravan. And I said, but I don't have it on the road. It's classed as a dwelling on a permanent site in a caravan park. And I go from Invercargill to Timaru and stay in it whatever, how many weeks I want in a year.
Have you tried other insurance companies?
No, well I wanted to go to state, but I couldn't understand when they used to insure it. Now all of a sudden they won't insure it. So
Insurance
people may have to be aware.
Yeah.
The policies are changing with them.
Yeah.
How many other companies are changing? That's just the point of money just going up.
It could just be we're in that period where everything is still a grey area for a lot of people. I think some companies will be waiting for other companies to take first steps, establish some policies, and then they'll follow suit.
Well, I could easily insure it through AA. That was never a problem, but I couldn't understand why state had changed their policy when I went to go back to them. So I thought, well, it was life insurance. But the trouble is, if they're going to do it, some of the others may be different.
Absolutely.
So it may be something you may come across as
Right, any other questions?
With the swaying, can you, have you got jacks on it?
Yeah, there are 4 telescopic legs on either corner.
But still,
yeah, it's still flat. Yeah. So they're underneath where the trailer sort of connects to the framing of the tiny house. There's sort of structural steel corners that you can sort of pull on, and you'd be able to fix to the ground. I dare say it would solve the issue.
Okay, please wait for the microphone.
Do you still have to put wooden blocks underneath the stabilisers?
That's another thing. My house actually built 4 sort of steel framed boxes that come with the tiny house, so it does get supported in each corner with telescopic legs, but for the rest of sort of underneath and just for general sort of levelling stuff out, they provide 4 huge steel framed boxes that came with the house, just for extra stability.
Sorry, electricity or lighting. When you have thunderstorms, you used to have to put timber like I do with the caravan underneath when you wind it struts down at the back and stabilise your van. Others with rubber. They bought the newer ones out later with like a rubber bung, which stopped the ground with the electricity with lightning going through your structure or your power, earthing it and giving you a shock.
I'm not too sure about that. The telescopic legs do have big old rubber feet on the bottom.
Oh, they got rubber feet.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen. Sorry, there's a question down the back here with the microphone.
Yeah, just the weight of it for towing it or moving it. Is it still under 3.5?
Not with all the stuff in it, I dare say it wouldn't be. Yeah.
So you'd have to get a certain type of vehicle.
Yeah, so I think if it is below 3.5 tonne and within those, length, width, height dimensions, then you can put it on the back of a Ranger, no problem. But as soon as you exceed any one of those, you have to have a heavy license.
Right. Over here, Colin.
Yes, just to contribute, that I've seen some of these tiny homes being manufactured, and some of them now have provision to just have where the young chap was talking about the wind-up legs in the corner. You can actually have them, the trailer assembly separate from the framing for the actual tiny house. So effectively, think of like a sheep crate or something. You can actually just unbolt them and wind them up clear so the tiny house is supported, and you can pull your trailer to take it away for warrant of fitnesses, if that is something that's important.
Yeah, so that's right. I can actually take it off the trailer. I've considered that maybe when I go to put it on a section, I will build foundations, take it off the trailer, pin it to the foundations and sell the trailer. I mean, they are like 6 to 10 grand,
That's your foundations paid for.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So there was one just here.
Oh yeah, my question was just about hempcrete. Are you familiar with?
With what, sorry?
Hempcrete. Okay. I just wanted a bit more information about. It's a type of concrete. It's like how you build but it's made of hemp, so it's like a mixture of hemp. There's like, if you look up like living big in a tiny house, they do have like a house that was built in Australia, and they use a lot of like sustainable materials.
For the foundations?
For the whole building.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
But it's in Australia.
Have you found another one? No. Okay, thank you very much, Brad. It was good to have the local content. Right. Very quick. 88.
Hey, how you doing? Good, yourself? Yeah, Brad, the foundations you're talking about would be just when you not on the trailer.
Well, you can either drive it on site and leave it on the trailer, take it off the trailer and fix the base to the ground.
Okay. I'm making an assumption that baby has been bathed and fed and is comfortable. So thank you for coming back. So I'm introducing Ella Lawton. As I said, somebody I only became aware of last week because she went to some function and met one of our people, and you know how it works in Southland. Somebody tells something, somebody something. Yep. So I gave her a ring, and here she is. She has her own tiny house story. We've been hearing that tiny houses are the ones that are on wheels. I think that covers yours as well.
Sure does, yep.
Okay. So please welcome Ella Lawson.
That's not the one.
He sat on the chair to use it.
Sit down then, shall I? No, I won't. I'm going to stand up. Okay, so in true fashion, I had no idea what I was coming along to. So sorry, I'm going to totally blame it on baby brain. This is, I'll just keep it very high level and not technical because the previous speaker did a great job at some of the technical stuff. And really this is just the story about how I ended up living in a tiny house. I've actually given quite a few interviews about this through various mechanisms, and Radio New Zealand's just done a short piece on me as well, so I'll give you my the website rather than, or the link rather than go over all exactly the same stuff. So I guess, you know those fabulous ideas that you have one day when you wake up and you go, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a tiny house. And at that time in my life, it was I was at a point where I didn't really have a home. I'd just lost my mum. I'd lost a relationship, and I was kind of really not knowing what I was going to do. And I felt like I really just needed something that could ground me and help me find myself and find my home. Really was what I was longing for. I was living in Wanaka, and I was convinced that I was going to spend the rest of my life as a spinster. And so I woke up, and on the same day I decided I was going to build a tiny house. I was also going to get a dog, because you know that seems like a good idea. So I found my dog, and that day I started looking asking around actually about building a tiny house, and I had no idea what I was doing. Luckily, actually, within about 2 hours of making this decision, I was talking to a friend and realised that I had actually taught someone. So I used to teach sustainable practice at Otago Polytechnic. And one of my students was developing a business to build tiny homes. And so really you just feel like, you know, the whole universe is starting to point you in the right direction. So I phoned Lindsay. She said, sure, you could be our first customer. That sounds fantastic. And let's start this was December, so let's start in January. So do you know what you want it to look like? No idea. You should really read up about some things, and of course in my true fashion I turned up in January in Motueka, ready to live with them for a month, and decided that we'll get on with it. So that's the summary of how I kind of ended up here. Much like the previous speaker, I went for a trailer on wheels. Again, kind of threw up all the pros and cons of having it movable. So obviously that means that you've got a whole lot of restrictions about weight. So this is a 7.2 metres long, 4 metres high, triple axle. Same, you can see the legs here, but you can actually take the house off the trailer. So the trailer itself is worth about $10,000, so I will probably remove that at some stage. So this is in early 2018 that I got this far. And so what I really wanted out of this was I wanted a home. I wanted somewhere that I could call my own. I never thought of it like I was going to resell it, so I didn't really care that I was going to do anything that was going to put people off. And so it was really about, okay, so what do I want out of it? And so I wanted something that was going to be really warm, really dry,
a happy, healthy home for me and my new dog. And so I really just made it up as we went along. I had no plans. I did have a builder, so I went up to Motueka to live with this family, and they kind of just helped me sit down each night and talk about what the next part of the build was going to look like. So I was fortunate enough to actually, much like again, I was able to take part in the build, and it was something that was really meaningful to me, and it actually took me out of being in quite a dark place as well. It was very good, I think, for my mental health at the time, and to be part of something that I knew was going to be contributing to my future. Learnt some amazing skills along the way, of course. So I did go for the wooden frame, and I went for woolen bats. I went for, interestingly enough, I'll come back to some pros and cons, but in particular about the weight thing, so staying within 3.5 tonne, because I thought that I wanted something that was going to be super mobile so that I could move it around really often. And what I've ended up doing is something quite different. I've only ever moved it twice, and I don't think I'll ever move it again. So looking back, I probably still would have done the same, but if anyone I knew that was going to do it differently, if they really only thought that they were going to move it once or twice, I probably wouldn't put it on a trailer, because you can get it picked up and moved by a big truck for a much cheaper. And there's a whole lot of problems that you don't have with weight. Saying that, the 3.5 tonnes only if you want it to be pulled by a Class 1 vehicle. And what I would actually have done is gone and got my Class 2 licence and then been able to rent a Class 2 vehicle, and every time I wanted to move it I probably still would have done it that way, and that would have meant me go overweight. So one of the big things, the only thing I really don't like about my house is I went and chose aluminium frame windows, not thermally broken, single glazed. And the only reason I did that was because of the weight. And now I deal with condensation, and it just frustrates the heck out of me. And so hopefully at some stage I'll actually retrofit it with probably PVC windows, double glazed as well. So it's a bit of a roundabout way, but I wanted to get that off my chest. So this is proof that having a PhD in architecture, you don't need to know anything about architectural drawings. This was me designing my own electricity system and where I wanted to put all my plugs. Because those are the highlights of my, the joy of being able to create something that you just, it was a lot of money looking at it. It was $100,000 in the end, but it was something that just gave me so much joy to take part in, and to be able to sit down and go, I'm just going to draw out where I'm going to put all my plugs in my house, and you don't have to mess around with all the architect drawings and things. It was just like, right, here's to the builder, here you go. So this is Dem and Lindsay and their 2 kids, and this was our roof raising party. And these guys were amazing. As much as it was building a house, as I said, it was a real through the process of soul searching, figuring out what I wanted my life to look like in this house, what I felt I could do in terms of the lifestyle that you have when you live in a tiny house. So interesting that we ended up talking about composting toilets and that sort of thing. They're all technical aspects of a house, but actually it's much more about how you want to live with that house. So taking care of a compost toilet takes a lot of time and energy and love, and being able to deal with all of everything that goes with it. And so it's a lifestyle, and you need to, I think, when people try and put in these technical kind of aspects of we need to have regulations for things like this, you can't regulate a compost toilet very well, because you have to be willing to work it to make it function. And so if anything, you would have a certificate to run a compost toilet. You wouldn't, certify the toilet itself. you'd certify the person, if you get what I mean. And there's a lot of things I think like that with tiny houses. Same with our grey water system. You just got to be really responsible to know that what you're putting down the drain is going to end up now where I'm living on my property. So going from, you know, the care of working with people and being with the house, and then taking that on through the journey of now living in the house and being part of the system rather than just a house where you've got systems that you work in. So this was the trip from Motueka down to Wanaka. So in the end it took about 4 months to build the house. I wasn't there the whole time because I did also have a job. But Dem and Lindsay worked on it full time, and I was able to then, so we rented this vehicle and towed it down. I got someone else to drive. I decided it wasn't something that I needed to experience. And luckily, because we didn't quite have the ballast right, and it really did fishtail over about 80k, so not the most pleasant experience I've had. Beautiful photo though. And so it was corrugated iron on one side, and actually we ended up with it's redwood on the other side. And that's the view from the back. It was actually a friend of mine driving down the road, and she texted me and she said, "Are you driving through Tekabo at the moment?" I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "I'm behind you. I'll take a photo for you." And so just in terms of that personalising, sorry, I didn't realise, I could have put more photos in, but sorry, I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. So in terms of personalising, I really wanted something that spoke about this house. I mentioned that my mum passed away, her home and her property was called Harakeke. And so I called the tiny house Whareriki, which is mountain flax, after the flax. And this idea of woven flax being the integration of family, and being there, and it talks about love and life in that picture. And it's just, again, I wanted to personalise what this house meant to me. I'm never going to sell it. Just a nice little story as well. My first project with my now partner, who came up to Motueka thinking maybe this could work, was making this round circle together, which is really cool. So this was the platform mezzanine above the kitchen, and you can look through there and out through the dining room and into the stained glass window and out. So this was my first move to Wanaka. It was on the section for just about a year. You can see it's a really quite urbanised area. So when I talked to Queenstown Lakes District Council about this, there was quite a story. The first person I got in touch with was like, "Yep, we can give you a consent to have that on your land. It's not a building, so you don't need a building consent, but because you're surrounded by neighbours, and being QLDC, we're very concerned about what the neighbours are going to think, so you need to go and get sign-off from all of them." And I was like, right, okay. Which was all fine, and in the end they were, happy enough to do that. However, these people behind me also didn't realise that we were about to sell this whole property, and it was great ideas. But unfortunately, so once I got all the sign-off, paid the money, and then I got back to and filled in all the documentation and went back to QLDC, the next person I talked to said, "Don't worry, you don't need a consent." And I said, "But I've already spent about $5,000 on this process." And they said, "Oh, yeah, sorry."
Did they give you your money back?
No money back. They said no, because we've already had to spend all the time on the paperwork. And I was just like, So this is the problem with tiny houses, I guess. We're just still in this grey area. It was really interesting because they didn't care at all about any of the connections or anything. They were just worried about what the neighbours were going to think. Well, one was and then one wasn't. So that was really unfortunate. And so at this stage, the house was just a shell, and I was going to get in there and build the kitchen and the stairs and all the rest of the bits, which unfortunately life got really busy, and I didn't, but then again I had friends come and help to build it, and I kind of either helped them or made their lunch. So yeah, as I said, it was there for a year or so, and then the nice person who I made the round window with actually asked me to move to Invercargill. So that's what I've ended up doing. So we've bought 5 acres down here in South Invercargill on Bain Street, and we're living in the tiny house. Nathan's also got 2 kids. So now we have, then we had Nathan, the 2 kids and the 1 dog, and then 2 dogs. And then and then I got pregnant. And so now there's quite a few of us living in our little tiny house. So, you know, tiny houses and flexibility, it's a beautiful thing. So now we've got the tiny house, we've got another caravan, and in fact, just before lockdown, we went out and panic bought a second caravan for me and the baby. So now we've got a little tiny house village for ourselves, which is great. And during lockdown, we also put up the solar panels as well. And so the tiny house is still on its own trailer, and it's independent of any other structures. And many of us living there are quite comfortable. The flexibility is a good thing. So we use the tiny house with its own kitchen and living room, and it's got a shower and a washing machine in it. And then really it's just the bedrooms and the caravans, and it works really well. So here's the whānau. This was the day Gloria came home 2 months ago. And we are in the process of building our house. So there is a progression here. Once Gloria starts crawling, the tiny house is not going to be the place for her. So this is another off-grid house. So both places are off-grid. We have no electricity on our section at all. And hopefully I'll be able to come and talk to you about our new house at some stage, because it's really different. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you very much. So Crux did a whole episode on tiny houses, and it aired on Radio New Zealand, and I'm on episode 9. And I guess the big thing that I come to at the conclusion of my talk with them is really challenging some of the councils around New Zealand to think more liberally about these issues of healthy, happy homes, and shouldn't we be supporting anyone who's hoping to get into healthy, happy home into ways of being able to do that. And it sounds like the first speaker here tonight was talking about tiny house villages, and the opportunity to actually create some really amazing communities, and I really hope that some councils are going to start allowing for those opportunities in the future.
Right, thank you. Questions? Colin, there's one over here. Is there a question there somewhere?
I was pointing towards Jonathan.
His turn will come. There's one down here, Colin. I think it's getting quite stuffy in here. There's no heating on.
It's not really about tiny houses, it's more about the fact that there's no sunshine here, and you've got solar panels, so you actually do manage to create electricity given that there's no sunshine in Southland.
Yeah, my partner would get really upset. He gets really upset when I talk about that. But coming from Wanaka, like, you've got to give me a break. It was much sunnier. Currently our batteries aren't big enough to do the job that they need to do. So we do okay on sunny days, and then we've actually got a backup generator. The builders use the generator a lot to build the house anyway, so it's currently also charging the batteries whenever it's going. So it does work, and we've got as much power as we need. The new house has got significant I think we've got 18 solar panels and a massive battery bank with nickel iron batteries, and we are yet to see. So we're definitely hoping to document how much we're actually using. I think it goes back to the same with things like composting toilets. It's very much a user thing rather than a technology thing. And so, you know, it's going to be only doing washing during the day. It's only going to, you know, and what we use at night is going to be really minimal. We certainly wouldn't chuck on an overnight dishwasher or anything like that. So it comes back to if you're willing to have that lifestyle, I think.
Okay, any other questions? Right, thank you very much. We've had 3 entirely different speakers, and yet it's all about the same subject. Jonathan, do you want to add anything?
Not really.
I think it would be useful to hear your official point of view.
Okay. I'm really conscious of the fact that you guys have all been in here for 2 hours, and I'd be really
We're
worried.
still willing to.
I'd be really worried if you wanted to stand here and listen to the boring man from the council talk. So, what I'd say is, I started having a look at this stuff yesterday, researching it. I like to leave everything till the last minute. Looking at stuff, look, it's clear that it's not clear, particularly with the councils. There have been issues. I have to say, the way that some of the decisions have come off, it does look like they're being bloody minded. I'm trying to prove a point. All I can say in defence of councils is sometimes when you're dealing with new stuff, your defensive mechanisms can spring in, and the fear of being found wanting or held responsible for a problem sometimes makes you do things that are less practical and pragmatic than are desirable. Having seen this and listened to the Dynamic 3 talking about it, I'm converted. I'd go with a tiny home as well. So I suppose all I'd really like to say is, from ICC's point of view, for planning and building, I'd really like our default answer to become yes, and our default question to become why not. So, like, if any of you are seriously considering this, come and talk to us. We're here to help you and provide advice, and we will make sure it's the correct advice.
I've just been to the council a week ago to talk about this, and I've got sent papers and papers to fill in, because I met 3 different people about this. Everybody gives you a different answer. And I asked for permission, and I've got sent all those papers to fill in for concept to build a house. I don't want a house. I'm trying to explain that. The house will be on wheels. I still have to apply for building concept, I was told. Because I asked the questions first. I said I want to connect to a service section here in Invercargill to have all the problems sorted with water storage, You have to apply for building consent, and I've got all the papers at home for it.
Okay. Look, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I'm not going to lie to you, it's on our side of the desk as well. I'm working with the guys. What I would say is, if you feel you're getting the run around, you feel that the answers aren't quite stacking up, ask to speak to me. I'm more than happy to sit down with you and the relevant people. Come and find me, I'll give you a car. It's really not a problem. We're here to help.
That's Jonathan Shaw, spelled Joe Nathan, Nathan, Shaw, SHAW.
Thank you so much.
Phil.
He lives in ICC. I'm an architectural designer.
I'm just about to talk about that.
I've got 3 projects that will be done and represented as the 20,000 kilometres. And so people say you can or can't do it. Well, I would come up and I've spoken to council on the table, and it's no problem to do it as a percent or not.
Okay.
So what about the previous speaker and how she said that she had money, I call it stolen, and not given back when they've taken $5 grand and then said, I actually didn't need consents, but don't give the money back. I call that theft.
Yeah. It was QLDC.
QLDC. Unfortunately, I used to work for them. That was my last job. Look, my position as manager of the department I head up, if I found a situation where someone had gone through a process and then at the end we told them they didn't need to, I would consider that we did hold some fault there.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think that's a great situation. Certainly not a situation I'd like to see arising here.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop us now.
Good idea.
It's a lack of oxygen in the room. So thank you, Jonathan, for being brave enough to come up here. And thank you for being here. We're running half an hour over time, but you didn't seem to want to leave, so I'm just going to hold you for another 3 minutes. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the team who've done all the things that need to do. I've written a page of thank yous, but I'm not going to do them now. But I do have 4 notices. On Sunday the 29th of November from 1 to 5, you will have the opportunity to join our Sustainable Alternative Living Tour. This is a fundraiser event to assist a special needs home in Uganda. These homes that you can go visiting cannot be described as standard homes. They all have points of difference, from solar-powered homes to barns, small eco-friendly houses to homes sited among the sandhills. The properties would not only be interesting but also may inspire. The cost is $25 per person, which includes afternoon tea. There's some information on the table at the back, and Dot Muir is sitting here. Oh, she's stand up.
I am standing.
So am I. So Dot is the person who's organising it, and if you're interested, take a piece of paper. There are about 10 large ones, A4s with a photograph on them, and then there's little snippets with the actual real information that you need. Also on the tables are plans of tiny houses available by Arch Draft, and Phil was the speaker back there, and he'll be happy to talk to you about those. Our next seminar is November the 17th, the 3rd Tuesday of the month, where the topic will be a slightly different slant dealing with urban gardening, a complementary topic to housing, which we feel is important, particularly so because of the COVID experience that showed that food security can be a real challenge. So keep an eye open for the advertising, and as a lead into that, Maria has a box here where we're offering you each a small item for your garden with the compliments of the South City New World. And finally, after our very successful event last month, a number of people said that these evenings should not be free, that there should be a charge. Our South Alive team has already agreed to make them free, but from tonight we'll have a Kohar jar available to those who've really moved to donate. It would certainly assist with the payment of this electronic gear which we hired and to pay the firm that set it all up. So that's the commercial. Enjoy your cuppa and your chat, and thank you for coming.